A really common one is and it's going to get worse with AI. A common one is when a person calls a grandparent or somebody and they have the voice where they think that their grandchild has a problem and they're asking for money to help them. That's going to get worse because now it can be totally imitated. So I don't know what we're going to do about that. The real thing is for the grandparent to call the child to
The
make
hang up,
sure.
yes. Hang up,
Yes.
call the child, yeah.
But so many people don't think of that. They get panicked because they think, oh my gosh, I don't want this awful thing to happen.
Hi, I'm Annette Bau, host of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast and founder of the Millionaire Insider. My mission is to help you simplify the money game so you can create a financially secure and fulfilled life without having to have a PhD or spend countless hours on your finances. You're going to learn how to think like a millionaire, stop worrying about money and wondering if your financial house is truly in order, and instead spend your time doing what you love. With over 3 decades advising 7, 8, and even 9-figure millionaires, and now joining that elite group, I'm in a unique position to help you make the best financial choices so you can create a secure financial future and retirement you love. This is the Wealth Inside and Out podcast. Today's free resource is our financial freedom guide. You can go to themillionaireinsider.com/FFG. Our financial freedom guide breaks down the 3 steps to create your financial freedom formula, which is your inner game, your foundation, your mindset, your game plan, which is your strategy, and then your outer game, which is your execution. All 3 of those are critical when it comes to securing a bright financial future. So I encourage you to download this guide and, more importantly, really use it, take action, and start applying it. Again, you can access it at themillionaireinsider.com/FFG. For today's show notes, you can go to themillionaireinsider.com/123. MillionaireSeries.com copyrights all materials and intellectual property. This information is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to replace any advisor or specialist or to provide any investment, financial, tax, retirement planning, or healthcare advice. By accessing this content, you agree to hold MillionaireSeries.com and its affiliates harmless for results achieved or not achieved. So today we're diving into scams, financial fraud, and financial detection. And I've asked Susan Swinehart to join us because she is an expert in fraud. So welcome, Susan. It's great to have you.
Hi. Hi.
It's good to have you. So let's start by just talking about the different types of financial fraud.
Well, a really common one is and it's going to get worse with AI. A common one is a person calls a grandparent or somebody and they have the voice where they think that their grandchild has a problem and they're asking for money to help them. That's going to get worse because now it can be totally imitated. So I don't know what we're going to do about that. The real thing is for the grandparent to call the child to
The
make
hang up,
sure.
yes. Hang up,
Yes.
call the child, yeah.
But so many people don't think of that. They get panicked and they do what they need to do because they think, oh my gosh, I don't want this awful thing to happen. And I think people are just going to program themselves that they hang up and call the child and deal with it that way.
Well, and let's just talk about that for 1 minute. If you can't reach the child and you have any other person, either an advisor, a CPA, an attorney, anyone you can call, that's important to say, this is what's happening. What do you think? Because what Susan just said, I think is so key. People get text messages or voicemail messages from the IRS saying you owe money. The IRS is never going to do that. They are sending you something in writing in the mail. But the problem is the fear center, your amygdala takes over and you go into this panic mode of, oh my gosh, the IRS is coming after me. I'm going to go to jail. I mean, whatever goes on in your mind. And so having somebody that is thinking clearly and rationally from their prefrontal cortex versus from their primal brain would be really important. And if you don't have an advisor, hopefully you get one. But I then encourage you to have a trusted friend or contact, and maybe you have an agreement with them that if they get notified of some money they owe, or they get notified that their child or grandchild is in desperate need of money, they have you as a fallback plan so that they can say, wait a minute, let's make sure this is legitimate. And I'm going to give you one other insight on this we're going to dive into when we talk into consumer fraud. But recently, I had an organization send a notification to us that we were using an image that we did not have authorization to use, and that they were going to come after us for money for use of it. And I'm like, well, that's odd because we are very, very anal about making sure that we have all the rights for anything we use. And we buy them through iStock, so we have all the proof and everything. So the company said, originally they said, well, if you have used it and you haven't paid for it, then you can just pay us some money. And I just thought that was kind of odd. And then in the next email, I said, well, we have, or my team responded, we have authorization to use these. And then they said, well, you have not purchased them through us. We have the rights, so you're going to have a penalty. So it was like, oh, this is interesting. So I went online and I searched their name. Sure enough, total scam. And so basically, we always put, almost always, like what the number is, what the company is, just so we have a reference to know where we got them, and then we have proof of that we bought them. Well, as soon as I said, stop, don't contact us again, this is a fraud, I did not hear one word. But it would have been easy to think, oh my gosh, maybe one fell through the cracks. And so again, those are things where you have to be calm and think about it, whether it is consumer fraud or business fraud or financial fraud. So what are some of the kinds of investment fraud, some of the most common that you see happening, Susan?
Investment fraud is when people are buying something and they really don't know or understand what it is they got. And then sometimes, hate to say this, sometimes advisors look more after themselves than they do the clients. And sometimes people just can't afford what they're trying to purchase. And that's an investment fraud. Sometimes, oh, my parents got in a situation, a long time ago. They bought some property in Florida and it was going to be developed, but guess what? Never got developed.
Oh man. Well, and I would say a Ponzi scheme would also fall into that.
Yeah.
And a Ponzi scheme is basically where the new investors are allowing the current investors to make money. And so Bernie Madoff is probably the best known for that. But there's been a lot of Ponzi schemes. Locally here, the Baptist Foundation was a Ponzi scheme. So it was like they're paying I just remember they were paying like 12%, like 1% a month. Everything else is paying like half that. It's like, how are they doing it? Well, they were doing it by their new investors giving them money and paying the current investors, and that is known as a Ponzi scheme. So you got
Yeah.
to just be aware, and if something sounds too good to be true, it is.
And
So,
nobody wants to admit they fell into that either,
oh, I know,
You
seriously.
won't tell anybody.
Right, right, absolutely. All right, let's talk about insurance fraud. What are some examples of insurance fraud? Now, that can normally impact the company maybe more than the individual. But one of the things you got to be aware of that I would say on that front maybe is an insurance company that's really not legitimate, or one that is not meeting the minimum requirements. And that could have an impact on the person. But then also what Susan was saying from a perspective of, where people are making false claims or doing things like that. And that's not ideal. So you got to just be aware of it. Or possibly where you're involved with somebody else on some property and they're saying this happened, you're like acknowledging it, not knowing for sure. And now you're in the middle of this claim. So you just got to be aware of it. And then let's talk for 1 minute about accounting fraud, because that goes on a lot of times at companies that then ultimately impacts the investor. So can you give some examples of that?
Well, a number of years ago, it was Enron. They had everybody fooled and thought they were a great company and really, doing really well. And then after they went through the accounting of the company, found out they weren't. And so that's type of thing. It just happens and people don't know. So the companies just have to be aware that they have really good people who are dealing with the money and keeping the records. And I think
Yeah.
since Enron, that's been a thing that people have looked at more because they thought Enron was such an upstanding company and wow, that's a great company. And now people are leery of those kinds of things.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And I also think it's the fact of having an independent auditor looking at what's happening. Because if you look at most cases where there's been major accounting and financial fraud from a company standpoint, they have no outside parties that are really reviewing them. And an example of Bernie Madoff, which was more of a Ponzi scheme, but where he was basically paying 1% a month and he was taking new investors to pay off his current ones, is that he was so in bed with the SEC. He knew all the auditors. It was just a disaster waiting to happen. And so I think just paying attention, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. So it's something to be aware of. All right, let's talk about consumer fraud. What are the most common types of consumer fraud that aren't just related to per se financial? It may overlap.
Fake invoices, warranty scams, get a lot of those in the mail, and pyramid schemes.
Okay. So let's start with fake invoices. Can you give us an example of that?
Well, saying that you need to pay for something that you didn't even purchase, and then having to deal with that with the company or the fake people or whatever, trying to get that straightened out that you didn't. And I see that along with credit cards. In fact, that happened last month. I had ordered one thing and then I knew I ordered that, but then the same company said I ordered something else. And I knew no way. It said I ordered ebooks. And I called the credit card company and I said, "There's no way I ordered these. All I can do is read what I'm doing in my work. I don't have time to read anything else." So that was pretty good. And it's just credit cards, I think, is one of the worst things, where people say, try to get you pay for something you didn't order.
Well, and this is really common. So I live in a, retirement mecca, and there's a lot of older people in Arizona as well as in Florida. And one very, very common practice here is they watch the obituaries and then they send an invoice to the estate while it's in probate. And then if somebody's not paying attention to it, like let's say they don't have an advisor or they don't have somebody that's paying attention to it, the executor or the trustee will just go ahead and pay it without even questioning it. So you got to be really, really clear on all the invoices you're paying and make sure they're legitimate and make them provide proof, because that is a common scam. So let's
Wow.
talk about warranty scams. What's an example of that?
Well, I think a common one is car warranties that you may not get covered what you thought you were paying for. And who knows how solid that company would be, or any appliance thing going on.
Mhm.
You're just never sure because everything is always like, well, that doesn't apply or it doesn't meet the standard to get reimbursed or for us to take care of it.
Yeah, I think that's probably really
They
common.
just wiggle out of it.
Well, and I think too, that's extremely common for older people. And I think whether it's you or it's your parents, you just got to really watch that, because there are a lot of scams out there. People are taking your money or they're selling you some warranty, something that costs, say, $500, and they're charging like $100 a year for the warranty on it. And you're like, wait a minute, like, you could have a brand new one. And by the time you need it in 2 or 3 or 4 years, you're not gonna it's going to be obsolete and you're going to get a new one. So, just be aware of that. And if you're not capable of it, consult with your advisor or a child or somebody you trust who can help you navigate through that scenario.
Yeah, and a lot of that's kind of common sense, like you said. It's cheaper to go buy something new after a few years than keep paying on that warranty.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it is. And if people get that notification in the mail, they automatically assume that they need to pay it, and not necessarily. So you got to be aware of that. Let's talk about pyramid schemes. Can you just give an overview of what that is?
Well, that's when people buy into something and you try to get somebody else join under you. And it's all the people at the top who make the money because really they're making their money off of getting people to join because they have to pay usually pretty large sums to get into the program. And then after you saturate everybody and they've already been saturated, meaning they've already been into the program, and then there's nobody left for you to get in and make money on. And it's usually
Yeah.
for some kind of product.
Yeah, I think there are some network marketing groups that have fallen in that and been charged with that. And you can always tell if it's a pyramid scheme because they're more focused in on recruitment of new people than they are actually selling the product. And a lot of times the product isn't even that good. And so you got to be doing your own due diligence. All right. So let's talk about some of these other ones that are kind of like, fake identity to, where it comes to like dating and things like that. I would love to hear some comments you have about that.
Well, sometimes people are so desperate to go with someone, or someone has a really good profile and they think that's the person. And then they just kind of fall into it where, the person will be contacting the person who thought they wanted to go with that person and ask for money. And they keep having this relationship. And they, oftentimes, let's say a woman has a relationship with a guy, and the guy said, well, he needs money for this bill. And then it becomes another bill, and then it's another bill, until I think again it gets to the point where the person who's giving, like the lady who's giving the guy the money, people get embarrassed no matter which way it works, man to woman or woman to man. They get embarrassed at a certain point and they won't tell anybody, and they don't know how to get out of it.
I think that's a great point. And I think too, I mean, there's been so many of those. I love watching those, I love watching like forensic files, and I and I also love watching ones that are like scams. It's fascinating. And what's so terrifying is how many of them have scammed over and over and over again. And it's probably mostly men, but there are women too. And what's so interesting about it is that, they fall into the same pattern of, making you feel really special, spending a lot of money, talking like they have a lot of money. And you're like, oh, I'm dating this really wealthy guy and everything's great. And then all of a sudden he's talking about this great investment. That's one path. And then it's like, oh, I just have somebody canceled. I have an opening for, 10,000 or 15,000. And then they'll do a small amount and then they pay you back. And you're like, oh my God, this is great. And you're like, oh, now I have an opening for 100,000. And it's just so classic. And so you really should be keeping your money separate. And you really should be dating somebody that is at least somewhat equivalent to where you are. Now, I know sometimes that can be awkward, but I think you just got to be really aware and paying attention. And if somebody's asking you for money, or somebody is telling you that this deal is just too good to be true, it is. And you got to run. Tied to that is fake identity, where somebody isn't even who they claim to be. Because if you did a search on them, you'd find out they've spent time in prison for defrauding people,
Yeah.
defrauding people. So what are some other ones?
Well, credit cards and debit cards, and that is so common for so many people. I think about everybody who has a credit card or a debit card. Something like that has happened, and so many people don't even look at their statement. I go over my statement thoroughly every month, and so many people don't. And you never know where they're going to get your credit card number, whether you give it to somebody at the restaurant. I always try to keep my eye on it, but that isn't always possible. And you just don't know who's using it for what. And even if you make purchases online, you don't know who's looking at that number. I don't know what kind of provisions they take when they take it online. I don't know what they do. If you're actually talking to a person, I don't know how they make sure it's secure,
Well,
but
I think
I
this is
always
an
hope it is.
excellent point. So my daughter has had two different scenarios where they've stolen her credit card online where she was buying Nike shoes. And I believe it is more common where it's an international purchase. So you got to be aware of that. I know that there's a gas station that literally every time I went to that gas station, now we just go to Costco, but before we did that, because it was just easy on my way to work, every single time I put gas in, within 2 to 3 weeks, my card had been compromised. And what they say they do is they put in
Damn it.
something in there that when they do, you put your credit card in, it reads it, and now they have all that information. Now,
Yeah.
another thing I want to talk about, which you kind of touch base on, is looking at your accounts. One of my beneficiaries, who doesn't really pay a lot of attention to his money, but now his sister is, literally, we were going through all the charges and I'm like, that one looks really odd. And she's like, yeah, I don't recognize that one. We talked to him and his wife. They didn't recognize it. And so we ended up, we called the company that charged it. We didn't hear back from them. So we basically said, fraud, and they took it off. Well, the company, it happened to be a nonprofit, called back and said, we are so sorry. We accidentally put in a credit card that was one digit off. They would
Oh,
have never even figured that out had we not identified it. And it was almost $200. So, I mean, it's not going to, bankrupt a person, but still, those add up. And then the other thing I will say is I delegate a lot of aspects of my accounting, but what I have realized, there are certain aspects I don't. And one of them I don't is reconciling it and going through the transactions. I have found more fraud since I do that step than whenever I delegate it because they don't know. And they think like, we have so many transactions in so many different businesses, it's virtually impossible. I can't train someone to know all the transactions. And sometimes
right.
I see transactions and then I go to either my team or my husband and say, did you charge this? And then if no one knows if they did, then we start doing a little more research. But that is something where you can literally save tens of thousands of dollars by paying attention to that. So that's a
Yeah.
really good one. What about phone apps? What are your thoughts as far as bank apps and phone apps? I know there's a lot of fraud there. What's your insight on?
Well, with phone apps, you think you're always dealing with a good company, but you don't know that 100% was in some instances. Usually you are, but you don't know that you are. And of course, it can be really enticing and everything looks so professional and say, oh, yeah, this has to be legitimate, but it may not be.
Mhm.
And so you have to be aware. I don't know, maybe a good thing is to look up and see if that company really is in business. Of course, they could still have something fake online, but just be aware of what are you dealing with.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's talk for 1 minute about our international friends, because I think in some ways, it's great that we have an ability to have more of an international economy. Now, I know that's shifting somewhat, but there's a lot of things that you can get for a cheaper rate if you're buying them overseas. But then with that comes the potential of fraud. So can you talk to that a little bit, Susan?
Well, I think when you're dealing with foreign countries, I don't think we can, it works as well far as what can happen to them as what it can do what can happen to somebody here in the States as far as penalties or pressing crime charges, because they're more, it's like, where in the heck do you go to get them? When it's online and foreign, you don't have any idea. You think you might know, but in reality, things are all over the place. It's just like the hackers are all over the world. Well, when you buy merchandise, they're over there somewhere.
Well, and I think too, it's hard to know. I like to use trusted brands that I know and not go to like weird sites. And if I go to buy something and it's like a weird site and it just does not seem right. I mean, fortunately, I have such great blockers on my computer that it immediately warns me like they're concerned about this site or it's a potential problem site. But a lot of people don't have that. So what I'd encourage you to do is to buy from brands and companies you know and trust and that are reputable. And then if in question, do a Google search or do a Chat GPT search. But you just got to be paying attention to that because, like she said, if it's international, it can be a lot more challenging and even possibly a higher potential for scams.
But people are always looking at the dollar and they'll go, oh, I'm going to take my chance because this is $15 cheaper than someplace else I can get it. And that isn't always a wise move.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I just want to talk a little bit about the IRS because we've all got those calls. And what I don't understand is that I love actually getting those calls and I always try to act like I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble with the IRS. Oh my gosh, what do I do?" And it's so funny because like literally they end up hanging up on me and then I call back the next day and the phone's been disconnected. So I'm like, there's something about that they know that I know they're not legitimate. So can you talk to that a little bit about what typically happens? And then more importantly, what a person should know and do if they get notified that the IRS is basically going to take away their entire savings, or if they don't pay them, they're going to throw them in jail.
Well, government places, including the IRS, they never call you. You always get a letter.
Yeah.
But some people are
Let
so
me
gullible.
just clarify. They don't call you and they don't text you. Okay.
That's right.
Getting a text or an email is the same thing That's not legitimate. They're going to physically mail you something to your address or record. So I want to be really clear on that because I think a lot of times people say, well, you said that they mail us something. Well, they emailed it. Well, that's not the same as US postal mail. So just be really clear on that. So yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it must be that way. Yes. And so you know that it's a scam if they're calling you or texting you any other way but by the US mail. This is not good.
Yeah, and then they're going to call you and they're going to say, "Hey, you owe something." Or what is really common, that's even not really the IRS, but it's where you buy something and you're like, "Okay, you just made this international purchase," which one of my clients did to one of her relatives that's overseas, and they said it didn't go through and we didn't get paid even though we sent it out, and she ends up paying them. I'm like, "Oh my God." Like, no, because it just seemed legitimate and they knew that she had made that purchase. So whether it's the IRS or anyone, if somebody's calling you saying you owe this or something like that, you get the phone number, you make sure that phone number jives with what you know. And let's just say they say, okay, a purchase you just made, we didn't get paid. Call your credit card company and get them involved. They can right away say, yes, absolutely, we paid that. It was paid. There's no problem with it. Just be smart. And part of this is people that are more fear driven, meaning their amygdala is larger, have a tendency of getting more into this where they're like so afraid, like, oh my gosh, the worst case scenario could happen. The IRS can come after me and I'm going to lose everything. And it just becomes a catastrophe and they just want it to go away. Don't let that be you. That's what these scammers are hoping for. And that's what they need to be able to stay in business. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's all very true. And it's just be aware. And all these financial fraud schemes and whatever, you got to have something going on in your head where you play it through there and saying, is this legit or not? And that kind of a thing. So you just don't get taken in. And some people are they're so believable, but I see why people will buy into that, but you just can't let their niceness or their persistence or whatever fool you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Or they're like, how much they love you, how beautiful you are, how great you are. And then it's like, oh, and by the way, give me money. I mean, it's bizarre. But I think some people are so craving that connection and that attention that they end up really, a lot of them have given away their entire life savings. And on one other note, and I want to address this, politics. I mean, one of the topics I hate talking about, they did research and it was on both sides, and I'm not going to get in. The report I saw that they did was heavier, which surprises me, on the conservative side than the liberal side, but both of them were bad. And I would love to know on this study, because they've done brains of people that are really fearful and their brain is their amygdala is larger. But this was the thing. They literally had people who had given away all of their money to the political realm. And it was devastating. There are ones that are like, you probably know more than I do, like Red Action or Blue Action, and it was like every single one of their campaigns was all about they're going to take over the country. And if you don't help us out, there's nothing we can do. And they did, like, I don't know, there was like 4 or 5 people that they interviewed, their family members, and they said how much money they had taken. And it was interesting because some of the groups gave money back, but a lot of them refused to. So again, that doesn't seem like a normal one, but it is. So you guys got to be really careful of that and make sure that if you have elderly parents who are more succumb to that, mentality of, oh my gosh, the world's going to end unless you give money to this organization, they could be suspect to fraud. And they were talking, it was just basically political fraud. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Susan.
Older people, especially here you go with donating to charities.
Yes.
Once you donate to two or three, your name gets on everything. And I had an elderly relative who gave to two or three things. Then she ended up getting mail like 6 to 8 pieces almost every day with other charities. And it got to be too much because she didn't really want to give to the others. And also, she didn't really know what was legitimate and not, and how much of that money was going to the CEO or the head of the organization and wasn't going to the benefit, the charity itself. So I think there must be something out there. And once you get a certain age, you get all these donation requests, and it just gets too much, and people keep giving money, giving money, giving money because they keep getting it, even though they shouldn't be giving the money because they can't afford to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, let's talk about some real world examples. So, why don't you just give a little bit of insight on, some of the losses that have occurred and, the number of people that are victims of.
Well, in 2022, there was $3.1 billion in fraud, and the average person lost over $35,000. But that is an 85% increase over 2021 as far as how many billions were lost in fraud. And
Wow.
I don't know, people are just really getting bold about ripping everybody off, I guess.
Well, and I think too, if the economy, if we go into recession or people are starting to, feel the crunch of not having enough money for food or for housing or for whatever else they need it for, you're going to see more and more fraud. I mean, it just, with lack of resources to meet basic needs, you're going to see crime go up. Probably crime as far as shoplifting, crime as far as stealing money, whether it's they're stealing purses or what they're doing, or they are, just defrauding somebody. So it's just, again, something to be aware of. Let's talk about a couple of actual real world cases. I know you got one with a client that I believe gave over $30,000 unknowingly or
Yes.
got talked into it. Can you share that one?
Somebody called her and he said he was from the federal government. And she said he gave his name. And she said she actually went online to see if there was such a person in the federal government. And there is somebody there. And so he told her that they had found out that she was money laundering, and she's a retired school teacher. And she said, I didn't do it. I do it as a teacher. How would I do that? And so he kept after her and kept in touch with her and told her not to tell anybody and, all that kind of thing. And he had a connection with her for at least two weeks or more. And she thought maybe she should tell her granddaughter about it, but she didn't because he said, don't tell anybody and that kind of thing. And the bottom line was in the end, he said, okay, he said, you'll get this money back because he said, he also brought in Social Security with it as well. He said, you'll get it back through Social Security, but you need to send us $33,000 wrapped in a bath towel and mailed in a box. And she did that. She actually did that.
How old was she?
She was probably about 80.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. One of the things on that same line is I have a personal banker where I bank, and I know their phone number, and I got a call on my cell number. And the only time I do get calls from my bank typically is when I get a call from my personal banker. And so the call came in, and I see it's my bank. And so I answer it, and the person said, did you do two Zelle transactions yesterday? And I said, no. And they're like, are you sure? Yeah, I'm positive. And they said, well, two came through and we thought they were fraudulent, but we wanted to warn you. And this was the key because it would seem legitimate. The phone number is right there. It's showing up on my iPhone as my bank. And I said, well, which account was it? Now, this was the key. I said, which account was it? And it was like there was a dead pause because he was not used to somebody having numerous accounts. I mean, like we have like 15 accounts with this bank. So it's like, okay, we've got a lot. And he would have no way of knowing that unless he was with the bank. But it was like dead silent, like, oh, you have more than one account. Well, if somebody knew about my accounts, they're going to know I have more than one. So that was my first clue, but he still seems completely legitimate. And so then I said, well, what is your email? And he gave me a Microsoft email. So then I knew. And so I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to conference in my personal banker and just make sure that all this is legit and yada, yada, yada. Well, he's like, okay. So I put him on hold to do it. And he stayed there for the longest time, like on hold. And then eventually he just disconnected. But I'm telling you, they are getting so good. The fact that they can basically get your phone number and be able to make you think it's your bank. You just got to be paying attention because if I wouldn't have paid attention to those little clues And those little details, I could have been a victim of fraud. So it's just really important to be aware of. Here, I just got one at real time. Let me tell you, this is so funny. Real time. I get these randomly and I find it fascinating. And it's whenever we travel out of state and we have a car, but it says, oh, this is great. Real time. Okay, Arizona State Department of Motor Vehicles. Final notice. Enforcement penalties begin on June 13th. Our records show that as of today, you have an outstanding traffic ticket. In accordance with the Arizona State Administrative Code, and it gives the code, if you do not complete the payment by June 13, we're going to take the following actions. We're going to report it to the DMV violation database. Well, if they are the DMV, why would they need to report it to the database? We're going to suspend your vehicle registration beginning on June 13th. We're going to suspend driving privileges for 30 days. We're going to transfer to a toll booth and charge a 35% service fee. You may be prosecuted and your credit score will be affected. Pay now. And their payment is azmv.gov-tollvu.cyon/pay. So it's got some of the legitimate website in there, but obviously you're not going to have all of that. And then it says, please pay immediately before enforcement to avoid license suspension and further legal disputes. And then the email it came from is like ysmtxll598@hotmail.com. So, I mean, those happen all the time.
That's,
And
I think, going on here. They told about it on the radio earlier in the week, and there's also one going around about people needing to pay tolls. They didn't pay tolls on the toll road. And somebody said that her mom said to her, gosh, I got to pay this toll road thing. And she said, what are you talking about? You've never even been on a toll road.
every time we go to California, my son plays volleyball at our university, and all our tournaments are over there. And we always are going through tolls. And most of them we pay. Sometimes you don't because there's no one there to pay. And so then they send us a bill and we pay it. They send it. We know we've been there. But it's so funny. We'll get notifications of saying you have a toll. And my husband's like, oh, and I go, honey, they don't even have your phone number. How would they be able to do it? He's like, oh, that's a good point. So again, you just got to be aware of it.
Everybody can figure out how to make a dollar in the wrong way.
Oh, yeah.
That if they put that to good, we'd be a great country.
Oh, isn't that the truth? So in closing, Susan, do you have some specific tips or things people need to be aware of that can really help them to avoid fraud?
Well, just be aware of all the technology and what you don't know. Ask someone to get help. Get help from someone if you don't know, if it's legit or not. I know early on I wasn't so good at technology, and I get an email at work, and my assistant, who was really good at it, she said, "Don't open that, don't open
Yeah,
that."
yeah.
Okay. So I learned that. I mean, you just need help and be willing to do that if you are using technology. Another thing is to use passwords. And now what's really popular is using two-factor. So there's two ways. So if a person figures out one way to get into your computer or cell phone, they have to figure out the other way. And I know it's more time consuming and kind of a bother, but it's well worth it so that you don't do that.
Well, and I just want to reiterate on this, and I have not heard where this actually landed, but there is several people who have come forth who have worked in the government that have said that back doors were open to our data, where one actually proved that our data went over to Russia. I've heard Russia, I've heard China, I've heard different countries. And the bottom line is when you have somebody named Big Balls in charge of our data, who is a known hacker, who has ties to Russia and China, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, protect your data. And so either going and subscribing to one of the groups that monitor it, and then you can put a freeze through that, or go to all the three main ones. You've got Transamerica, you've got Equifax, and you've got Experian. And all of those you can go and put a pause on. Now, be really careful because Experian is like isn't Experian the main one? Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah, Experian is the main one. And I literally had a problem because I went in and put on mine and then I couldn't get it off. I needed it off for one of the companies I do business with. Sometimes they do reports, checks before you can get licensed. And literally I had to send like a FedEx with my picture, all these things for them to remove it because I never got the password, the PIN password they said they were going to send. So you just got to be aware of it. Now I just go through a third-party app, and through there I can just basically say freeze credit or open credit, and it's a lot easier, but it does cost money. So again, you've got to just be aware of that. One of the things I just want to reiterate that you said, Susan, is that older people are more likely to be fraud victims. So whether that's you or a parent or a friend, make sure you're aware of that. So can you just kind of give an overview of some things to watch for and what commonly happens?
Okay, initial contact may be by phone. And this is the thing, you don't answer the phone unless you recognize the phone number or know who it is, because if it's important, they'll leave you a voicemail. And then you can decide if you want to take it or not. And a lot of times I ignore my phone calls and there's never anything on my voicemail. So who
Well,
knows
and
who it
tied
is?
to that is the fact that what number they give you to call back. We're calling from your credit card, and then they give you a different number. So be really aware of that.
Yeah.
So
So pay attention to that. You don't have to answer every call. That's a for sure. So just so I answer those that you know. And then talking about mail and the banks, a lot of banks will send you an email on their letterhead, but you can't even trust that. And if you do get one of those, call them, call your own bank, because criminals have gotten so good at duplicating your bank's letterhead. So don't fall for that for sure. And just
yeah.
be aware of the text. Just go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to make sure you're not getting scammed, because now, today, it's more common than ever and just escalating.
Well, and if they're offering you like some big prize, or they're trying to get upfront money or transfer fees, this huge thing you're going to win. And
Yeah.
obviously romantic relationships are a big one.
Yeah.
So
Bottom line is protect your money all times. I don't want to give
yeah.
away my money.
No, absolutely. And being alone is better than being in an abusive relationship, whether it's physically abusive, emotionally abusive, or financially abusive. So just if you're not happy with who you are by yourself, then go get some support, because it is terrible to be in a relationship where somebody's abusing you financially and then they leave you and you're going to be right back to where you were before, but with less money. It's not a good situation. So just be aware of that. So anyway, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insight, Susan. This was amazing.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm Annette Bao. All international copyrights are reserved. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now. If you love the content of this podcast, please follow and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of episodes, and also give us a 5-star review and share a comment. We really appreciate it. Congratulations on taking another step to create a financially free life you love. If you're not sure about your financial future, or that it's in order, or you are ready to stop worrying about money, or possibly the fear of becoming a bag lady, ending up broke in retirement, or you simply are ready to know your financial house is in order so that you can have a bright financial future, please go to themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. And that doesn't stand for non-sufficient funds. It stands for Next Step Finance. It's the next best step of what you need to do so you can avoid an NSF notice in your future. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. The number of women who were not broke or poor while working or married is staggering. The entire mission of the Wealth Inside and Out podcast is to ensure you have the information for you, your family, your friends, anyone who's willing to listen to it and apply it so that you can create a financially free life you love. Again, themillionaireinsider.com/NSF. Until our next episode, take one action that will help you create a financially free life you love. I'm Annette Bao, your host. All international copyrights are reserved. Bye for now.